My name is Paul Rudensky. I am the director of JewishGen and the Peter and Mary Calico Center for Jewish Genealogy Research at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. Today's talk of one of a series of JewishGen talks, which airs Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on most Wednesdays. We have recorded and posted most of these talks, so if you cannot join us on Wednesdays, please visit our YouTube channel to view the talks at your convenience. An important part, and let me just say a little bit of some of my thoughts about this topic. An important part of genealogical exploration, at least for me, is to try to imagine what the lives of my ancestors were like. The more data that we can gather, the sharper the images, in our minds at any rate, of our long dead relatives. We usually think of our biological ancestors when we think of those who came before us, but we should also consider the people who paved the way before us in this country, especially those who came before the Great Migration of the late 19th century. So what was it like to be a Jew in the United States in the middle of the 19th century? What was it like to serve during the greatest conflict in this nation's history? Today, we will have the opportunity to delve into these questions as we explore the experiences of Jewish soldiers on both sides of the conflict. We are fortunate to have Alexandra Apito and Caitlin Winkler introduce us to the Shapell Roster and the soldiers that it describes. A little bit more about the Shapell Roster. It is the roster of Jewish service in the American Civil War, and it is a continually expanding digital database documenting the lives and military services of the Jewish soldiers and sailors who served during the war. Since their last presentation on JewishGen, the roster has grown significantly, including major progress in identifying Confederate soldiers. This talk will highlight recent additions, explain how the website and database function, and show how the roster can be accessed through JewishGen, and demonstrate how researchers can search the roster for individuals and families. The webinar will also spotlight several compelling soldier stories from newly identified individuals and discuss how genealogists and historians can share information and collaborate with the Shapell Roster research team. And we're very honored today not only to have Alexandra Apita and Caitlin Winkler, but also our Ellen Coet, who is JewishGen's director of the USA Research Division. And with that, I'm pleased to hand the microphone over to Ellen.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. That's where I am in Boulder, Colorado. I just wanted to put in a plug. There's been a lot of new additions to the USA database on JewishGen, in addition to the Shapell roster of Jewish service in the American Civil War, which you're going to hear in great detail about today. Some other earlier American searchable name databases on JewishGen include a Jewish Civil War veterans list, which will be referenced today. It was originally compiled by Simon Wolf. We have Jewish soldiers and sailors in the Spanish-American War. We have a wonderful early American Jewish portrait index that dates up until about 1862. And two very recent additions we are proud to introduce are the first American Jewish families database created originally by Rabbi Malcolm Stern, as well as the Biographical Dictionary of Early Jewish America. So I will put links to all of that in the chat. Feel free to email me at any time if you have questions about anything or ideas about additions for JewishGen's USA database. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers today. I'm proud to call both of them my friends. The first is Alex Apito. She joined the Shapell roster as a senior researcher back in 2013. In addition to her research duties, she also produces their social media content. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Historic Preservation and Art and Architectural History, a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island, and she studied preservation and art in Florence, Italy. Alex hails from the Boston area. Caitlin Winkler is also a senior researcher for the Shapell roster. She joined the project in 2012, straight out of law school. She fulfilled the team's quota for a Jewish Civil War nerd. Winkler holds a JD from Washington and Lee University and a Bachelor in Historic Preservation from the University of Mary Washington. She previously interned with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Land Trust of Virginia before parlaying her legal research skills into the life of history detective work. We like to welcome you both, Alex and Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you everyone for having us today. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Apito. As Ellen said, I'm a senior researcher with the Shapell Roster of Jewish Service in the American Civil War. My colleague Caitlin Winkler and I are very excited to be here with you today to discuss what's new with the Shapell Roster and how you can utilize our database in your own research. Today, we will discuss the ins and outs of the Shapell Roster, including what information you can find there and how to access it yourself, our partnership with JewishGen, and how to use their search capabilities to find results in the Shapell Roster. We will also highlight some of our more recent finds and interesting soldier stories and fill you in on some relevant research tips and tricks related to these findings. For those of you not familiar with the organization behind the Shapell Roster, the Shapell Manuscript Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the research, collection, and exhibition of the Shapell Manuscript Collection. Comprised of original manuscripts, historical documents, and objects personally collected by Benjamin Shapell, it spans over 2 centuries and focuses on the histories of the United States and the Holy Land, with an emphasis on the 19th and 20th centuries. The foundation produces exhibitions, books, documentaries, and a podcast called The Human Side of History. Additionally, Benjamin Shapell and Jonathan Sarna are collaborating again on a forthcoming book about Mark Twain and the Jews. The Shapell Roster is an ongoing reappraisal of the military service of the Jews in the American Civil War, presented as an online database containing more than 50 searchable data fields, a bibliography of more than 2,500 primary and secondary sources, and more than 50,000 historical documents. In August of 2022, the Union records were made available to the public with a plan to release Confederate records state by state. In 2024, we published the records from Kentucky, this past year, Louisiana, and our goal is to publish Georgia this year. A brief overview of how we got here begins 14 years ago when Benjamin Shapell wanted to create a more user-friendly and historically accurate version of Simon Wolfe's The American Jew as Patriot, Soldier, and Citizen. The book was written in 1895 in response to allegations that Jews were not willing to fight for their country. This book was an impressive undertaking for its time, but known to be incomplete, and in many instances based on name profiling. We began to review Wolfe's roster and realized how much more the Shapell roster could include, given the breadth of information now available. While we may never know an exact number, as of today, there are 3,293 records in the Shapell roster with evidence of Judaism and proof of service. 1,760 of them have Union service, 1,527 with Confederate service, and 8 with service on both sides. And we are discovering new soldiers all the time. We have spent more than a decade amassing data and collecting documents from numerous sources, many of which are not available online, to make accessible to you all in one place. For every service member in our database, we compile a complete military service history, or as complete as the historical record allows, and track down substantiated evidence of Judaism. We also include the following data for each soldier and sailor if available: date and location for birth, death, and burial, marriage, residence, and occupation details, the connections, if any, between him and the other individuals in the database, whether they were family, neighbors, comrades, etc. And finally, and most excitingly, primary source documents connected to your ancestor, like the examples pictured here on this slide. We don't have photographs and personal letters for every soldier. We do have some documents available for most Union soldiers and many Confederate soldiers to help you personally connect to your ancestors' past. Many of the images you will see in this presentation today were scanned by us at the National Archives and contain information and stories you won't find anywhere else. These images are free for you to download and keep. The archives is our primary resource for soldiers' service histories, but we also look at a plethora of other online catalogs and brick-and-mortar institutions. When we identify documents and images connected to our soldiers on paid websites, such as Ancestry and newspapers.com, we include citations for these documents so you can go and find and access these additional images for yourself. If you need help accessing any documents included in the citations for a soldier, please feel free to contact us. We love hearing from you. We love connecting with descendants and researchers, and we love giving you additional material and resources if we can. The resources available online to researchers grow every single day, and thus so does our bibliography. For example, Ancestry has indexed the 1850 and the 1860 slave schedules on their website only in the past few years, and we have begun tracing soldiers' connections to slavery, something we could not have done at the start of the roster. We are thrilled that the Shapell roster has been included in JewishGen's myriad of amazing resources. If you want to look to see if your ancestors in our database, you can find out using the JewishGen unified search. We will include this more technical information of the next following 4 slides that I'm going to talk about in a handout that we're going to send, so you can refer back. So no worries as I go through this. Once you type your ancestor's name into the search bar, you can scroll down through the results and look for our logo to find the Shapell roster of Jewish service in the American Civil War. When you click on the JewishGen results, the search results page will open a new window in the Shapell roster database. Select the record you want to open, and you will then be able to explore your ancestor's soldier page. Something that is a little different between JewishGen and the roster is that our name search does not have the option of a phonetic search like JewishGen. You must have an exact name match to retrieve a soldier's record. So if you're not getting the results you would like, try searching on a different name variation. Also, the way our integration is currently configured with JewishGen, middle names are not included, so please skip a middle name or initial if you have one. Looking to include a location in your search, the different JewishGen location searches include all of our location fields in our database. You can find where soldiers were born, where they died, or had a service-related event take place. A feature of our database we are really excited about is that you can choose to use a modern city or town name or its historical location. Our database includes both. So if your ancestor was born in Kempin, Posen, Prussia, which today is Kepno, Poland, you could search on Kempin or Kepno, Prussia or Poland, and your search would still be successful. Our database's locations are not compatible with the region search dropdown on JewishGen for non-US based locations. Even if you only want to search on a country or kingdom, type it in the town field. If you would like to search generally on a US state, not an individual municipality, however, you can select United States in the region dropdown and then the individual state. Also to note, especially with some of those fun European city names, you can search on location names in our data with or without the diacritical marks. If a place name includes punctuation, however, like a period or an apostrophe, leave that out. This goes for soldiers' names as well. Do you want to go directly to the source? You can search the Shapell roster directly using our advanced search page. A link to the advanced search is also included in our handout. As we mentioned in our introduction, our database includes over 50 searchable fields. So the search page has a lot of options. Here are the fields we find most helpful for genealogy research. Soldier name. Again, our database requires an exact match, but we record all kinds of alternate names a soldier was found listed under, so different variations will work. You can use middle names and initials here. If you are not finding your soldier when you search, please reach out to us and we can help. Or maybe you have a new name for us to add. Either way, we want to hear from you. Birth and death information. Especially if your ancestor had a common name, this can narrow things down. Like we said earlier, historical and modern place names both work. Regiment state. If you have an idea where your ancestor may have served but don't know his regiment, you can narrow your results too, or let you explore all the different soldiers from a particular state. Document tags. This is a fun extra. If you want to see all of the soldiers with documents mentioning Abraham Lincoln, discover which soldiers had ties to your local synagogue, or view our collection of over 50 historical ketubot we have uncovered in Civil War soldiers' pension files, explore our documents tag field to see what different historic figures, events, Jewish communities, and document types that you can search for. So what's the latest? As you might imagine, it takes time to find the soldiers and sailors in the historical record, collect the documents, and populate each soldier page with the data we find. In 2025, we discovered over 100 new Jewish service members from both sides of the war. Right now, our focus is Georgia, but with family connections, soldiers' post-war migrations, and contact with researchers and descendants like you, we are finding new information about soldiers from every corner of the country all the time. If Caitlin's internet is back, I think she's here. She's going to take over.
I'm
Tell you,
here.
Great. Tell you a few of the stories that we have discovered recently, and to give you a few tips on researching your own Civil War ancestors. Thank you for being here today.
Hey everyone, so sorry for that technical difficulty. Thank you so much, Alexia, for having our backup on file. My power flashed out for a minute for helpful reasons. So, hi everyone again, I'm Caitlin, and I get to tell you about some newly identified Jewish Civil War soldiers. Bernard Nordlinger was included in Simon Wolfe's 1895 roster. While working on Bernard, we discovered he had a brother, Wolf Nordlinger, who also served during the Civil War. This is probably the most common way we discover new additions, delving into identified soldiers' family genealogies. We have brothers, cousins, fathers and sons, and other family dynamics that play out during the Civil War. The Nordlinger brothers were born in Alsace, France, and immigrated to the United States in the early 1850s. They were living together in Macon, Georgia. Ooh, actually, can we go back one slide? Sorry, Alexia. There we go. Perfect. When the Civil War broke out, Bernard volunteered towards the beginning of the war in October 1861, enlisting as a private in Burgard's Light Artillery Company, 3rd Brigade Georgia State Troops for 6 months. So far, Bernard is one of 7 Jews we have confirmed as serving in this unit formed in Macon. And we are researching further to see if there were others. There was no one Jewish company or regiment from any state in the Civil War. However, fellow Jewish co-religionists often enlisted together. Burgard's company, Light Artillery, was also known as the Macon German Artillery, and many Jewish Civil War soldiers opted to join companies formed of fellow countrymen, frequently German companies, but also French, Polish, British, etc. Bernard was French, but from a region bordering what would become Germany, and 5 of the Jewish men he enlisted with were Bavarian. Bernard's descendants claimed he went north serving the Confederacy and was wounded in one of the Valley campaigns and brought into the District of Columbia. He was, quote, cured of his wounds and sent down to Camp Parole just outside of Annapolis, but nobody exchanged for him. So when the war was over, he just marched up to Georgetown and settled there. The Nordlinger brothers would come to Washington, D.C. and settle in Georgetown, either during or shortly after the war. But this bit of family lore cannot be corroborated. There are no official records showing Bernard was wounded or captured, and Camp Parole was primarily used for Union soldiers who had been released from Confederate custody and were awaiting official authorization to be returned to their regiments. Wolfe waited almost another 2 years to enlist following his brother, joining the 14th Battalion Georgia Infantry State Guards as a private in July 1863 for 6 months. By this time, the Confederate Conscription Act had been in place for over a year, and Wolfe may have opted to volunteer for the State Troops Regiment for 6 months to avoid being drafted for 2 years. Wolfe's regiment was made up of the local fire company and was assigned only for the local defense of Macon, Georgia, and they never ended up leaving their county. Wolfe's obituary would similarly claim, like Bernard's, the descendants that he came to DC during the war. While the exact timeline and manner of Bernard Nordlinger's arrival in Georgetown is unknown, he and his wife Hannah were settled there by 1867 when their daughter Jenny was born. Bernard was first listed in the city directories for Georgetown in 1868, but birth locations for children are a great tool in tracking someone's movements across the country, since it may take a person longer to get established and included in a directory. And not all cities' directories are extant for every year or available online and searchable. In Georgetown, Bernard operated a successful shoe store that his son, Isaac Bernard, would work at for over 50 years. Bernard was also deeply involved in the Jewish community in Georgetown and Washington, D.C. at large. Previously, in Macon, he had been found so knowledgeable about Jewish practice that the Jewish community there asked him to serve as lay rabbi. In Georgetown, Bernard founded a small Reform synagogue called the Mount Sinai Society, but there were not enough Jews living in Georgetown at the time to sustain a congregation. So Mount Sinai was absorbed by the larger, older Washington Hebrew congregation. Perhaps at this larger synagogue, son Isaac Benjamin met his future wife, a Miss Barbara Stern, daughter of Union veteran George Stern, a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps during the Civil War. Both the Nordlinger and Stern families remained members of the Washington Hebrew congregation for many decades and were buried in the congregation's cemetery. Wolfe Nordlinger arrived in Georgetown sometime between 1864 and 1865. He was still in the military in Macon in 1863 when his daughter Hannah was born there, but in 1865, he appeared in the city directory in Georgetown, and his son Benjamin was recorded as being born in DC in October of that year. Similarly to his brother, Wolfe joined the retail business, operating multiple clothing stores around DC. He was successful enough that he was able to commission architect Thomas Franklin Schneider to design him a new home in the 1890s, seen here at right. Many years later, the house was purchased by W. Averell Harriman, one-time governor of New York, U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and heir to the Union Pacific Railroad fortune, among other things. Harriman's third wife, Pamela Churchill Harriman, seen here, former daughter-in-law to Winston Churchill and U.S. ambassador to France, used this residence to host numerous gatherings and fundraisers for the Democratic Party. Although Wolfe Nordlinger moved to Georgetown before he turned 30 and would remain there for the rest of his life, he never forgot his connection to Georgia and the Jewish community there. He gave generously to and served on the board of control for the Hebrew Orphans Asylum in Atlanta, later called the Jewish Orphans Home, and transformed today to be the Jewish Educational Loan Fund. In D.C., Wolfe also gave to Jewish charities and was a member of his local B'nai B'rith Lodge. He was buried in Washington Hebrew Cemetery with brother Bernard. Jacob Osorio de Castro is another new addition to the roster, found through family connections. Born in Curacao, Jacob and his younger brother Isaac moved to St. Croix, where they met the de Sola family. The registered pictured here in the center of the slide is the 1855 Danish West Indies census for Christian said St. Croix, and it shows Isaac living with Jacob, Jacob's wife, Hannah de Sola, and their children. Under religion or church that the person attends, everyone in the family is listed as Israelite. The de Castro and de Sola families immigrated to New Orleans sometime prior to the Civil War. Brother Isaac de Castro and brothers-in-law, Benjamin and Aaron de Sola, plus de Sola nephew, Albert Henriquez, all served in Louisiana Confederate regiments, alongside Jacob. Jacob and Aaron de Sola served together as privates in Company I of the Orleans Guards, Louisiana Militia, a local unit to defend the city. Only 2 undated muster rolls remain extant for this regiment, so it is unknown when they enlisted. In late February 1862, Jacob was included on the list of managers running a, quote, military mask and fancy dress ball for the Continental Guards, another New Orleans militia company. Jacob is listed as a sergeant. It is unclear whether he also served in this company or was volunteering to assist with the ball from the Orleans Guards. We have found no official records with the Continental Guards, so it remains a mystery. Either way, war did not appear to be top of mind for the New Orleans militias at that time, although they would be under Union occupation only 2 months later. Jacob's fortunes suffered after the Union took control of the city. It is alleged that when 2 of Jacob's young children died, he blamed Union occupation and refused to sign the Oath of Allegiance, deciding instead to flee to Mobile, Alabama. Muster rolls for the 1st Mobile, Alabama volunteers corroborate, at least partially, this account. He enlisted again as a private with this militia unit in July 1863 and was detached to work in the conscript office in Mobile. After the war, Jacob moved his family to Savannah, Georgia. There he opened a cigar store. Jacob's Jewish faith remained a central tenet in his life, which he passed on to his children and grandchildren. His daughter, Grace, married Jamaican-born Dr. Isaac P. Mendez, rabbi of Congregation Mikveh Israel, one of the oldest congregations in the United States. Jacob remained very close with Grace and Rabbi Mendez. He is shown living with the couple on the 1880 and 1900 censuses. And in 1895, Mendez had Jacob lead part of Mikveh Israel's Rosh Hashanah services, reported in the newspaper. Jacob's grandson, Morris Samuel Lazaron, go back one slide again, sorry. There he is. Jacob's grandson, Morris Samuel Lazaron, pictured here, son of his daughter, Alice Zipporah de Castro, was also an ordained rabbi and led the Baltimore Hebrew congregation. A profile on Lazaron claimed Judah P. Benjamin was his great uncle and stated an autographed picture of Benjamin presented to his niece Alice Lazaron was in possession of the family. No direct connection or familial relationship has been uncovered between Jacob or his wife Hannah DeSola and Judah P. Benjamin to this point. For Jews in the South, particularly those who lived in New Orleans and or hailed from the Caribbean originally, we are finding it was particularly in vogue to claim family ties with Benjamin. To be fair, though, we have confirmed many of the claims to be true. Rabbi Lazaron tried to serve as a chaplain during World War I, but did not receive his commission until November 7, 1918, 4 days before the armistice was signed. Okay, now Marcus Bernheimer. Marcus Bernheimer was born in Liberty, Mississippi, and was 14 years old when the Civil War began and 17 when he joined the fight. In 1860, Bernheimer was still living with his family in Port Gibson, according to the 1860 census. The 1860 federal slave schedule shows the family had owned one enslaved woman, but she was marked as a, quote, fugitive from the state. During the war, Marcus Bernheimer became a cadet at the Georgia Military Institute in Marietta. The governor of Georgia housed the state's engineer corps at the school to protect the cadets from being drafted. But once General Sherman brought his troops across the border into Georgia, it became all hands on deck. Rather than having his students drafted and separated across numerous different regiments, the superintendent of the school, Francis W. Capers, organized them into the Battalion of Georgia Military Institute Cadets and had the unit mustered into the regular Confederate Army. The cadets made up Companies A and B of the battalion. Interestingly, Company C was comprised of convicts from the local penitentiary who were offered full pardons in exchange for pledging their service through the end of the war. The battalion served in the Confederate Army of the Tennessee, active along the Chattahoochee River and during the Siege of Atlanta. The cadets were then assigned to protect the state capitol, then at Milledgeville. And while they were away, in November 1864, Sherman burned the Georgia Military Institute to the ground. The battalion was not disbanded until May 1865, a month after the Civil War had officially ended. In his February 1865 report, Major General Henry C. Wayne described the efforts of Superintendent Capers and the GMI cadets during Sherman's campaign through Georgia as follows. To Major Capers, I am under the greatest obligations. His qualifications for military command are of the highest order and entitle him to a prominent position. They have been brilliantly illustrated by the corps of cadets whose gallantry, discipline, and skill equal anything I have ever seen in any military service. I cannot speak too highly of these youths who go into a fight as cheerfully as they would enter a ballroom, and with the cadence and steadiness of veterans. No official records from this battalion survived the Civil War. In 1905, one of the cadets who served in Company B compiled an incomplete roster of the members of the battalion based on memory, which has become tantamount to the official record for the unit without anything else being available. Unfortunately, Marcus Bernheimer was left off this accounting. We discovered his name in the American Jewish Yearbook, a great place to look for notable American Jews around the turn of the 20th century. The yearbook mentioned Bernheimer's Confederate service with the GMI cadets. Fortunately for our work, we were able to confirm this service because Bernheimer's parole from after the war is still extant. The parole is part of the Marcus Bernheimer collection, donated by the family to the St. Louis Jewish Community Archives, once held by the Saul Brodsky Jewish Community Library and now housed at the St. Louis Kaplan Feldman Holocaust Museum. We know a sweep of local institutions like these will lead us to finding new names and new insights into previously identified soldiers. Community archives are often where families donate their historical documents and artifacts to make sure loved ones' legacies are preserved. So definitely check out these kinds of locations in the areas your family came from. Seen here at center, the parole shows Bernheimer was a private in Company A of the Battalion of Georgia Military Institute cadets. He pledged the oath of allegiance to the U.S. government on May 4th, 1865, and was given permission to return to his home in Port Gibson, Mississippi. With Confederate soldiers in particular, we know we are missing names due to Confederate service records being incomplete or altogether non-existent due to lost, mislaid, or destroyed muster rolls. As far as we know, Marcus Bernheimer was the only Jewish member of the Georgia Military Institute cadets, but we cannot say so definitively. After the war, Marcus Bernheimer returned home to Port Gibson and joined his father's successful mercantile business, S. Bernheimer and Sons. Then, in 1875, he moved to St. Louis to go out on his own. In St. Louis, Marcus Bernheimer had his hands in many business ventures and political forums. Bernheimer formed a grocery partnership with his brother-in-law, Nicholas Scarf. He also helped to develop Merrimack Highlands Company, one of the first subdivisions developed in St. Louis. He ran the M. Bernheimer Milling and Mercantile Company, a flour producing business, and was the Democratic candidate of the 1893 St. Louis mayoral election. In 1910, he ran successfully for the position of circuit court clerk, a position he held until his death. Bernheimer was also very involved in St. Louis Jewish Society and charities. He was elected the first president of both the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society of St. Louis and the Associated Hebrew Charities, and was a member of Temple Shari MF. Bernheimer's life came to a dramatic end in 1912, and his passing made the national news cycle. Following the death of his brother Jacob, aka the Cotton King of Mississippi, Bernheimer sued several members of his family when he was largely excluded from Jacob's will, causing a court battle over the $1 million estate. So worked up over the dispute, Bernheimer arrived at the courthouse only to drop dead of a heart attack on the steps. Family members from both sides of the case rushed to Bernheimer's aid, but it was too late. One positive outcome from that fateful day was that his daughter, Lucille Bernheimer, allegedly met her cousin, Maurice Lowenstein, for the first time, who would soon become her first husband. Unfortunately, Lowenstein died less than a year after his marriage to Lucille. Lucille's story, of course, continued. Following Lowenstein's death, she moved to New York City and attended the New York School of Philanthropy, now the Columbia University School of Social Work, and the Rand School of Social Science. After graduation, Lucille devoted herself to the cause of women's suffrage, joining the Equal Suffrage League of St. Louis and the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She then worked with the National Civil Liberties Bureau, advocating for the rights of conscientious objectors to military service. After the NCLB was dissolved in 1920, she became the executive secretary of the newly formed American Civil Liberties Union and remained with them for over 2 decades. But her dedication was strained when the ACLU began removing members of the organization who were known members of the Communist Party, and she finally quit the ACLU to protest their advocacy for the rights of American fascist groups in the 1940s. In 1954, Lucille published her autobiography, The Education of an American Liberal. Lucille's second husband was Joseph Milner, born Joseph Milner Goldblatt, a philosophy professor turned real estate magnate and a major sponsor of the University in Exile, a graduate program for exiled European scholars persecuted by the Nazis and later other totalitarian governments. Even younger than Marcus Bernheimer, Charles Felix Ory is one of the youngest soldiers in the Shapell Roster and the only Union soldier we are discussing today. Because our focus is currently on Southern states, we are adding fewer Union soldiers at this time, but we are still finding some. Louisiana fielded many Confederate regiments during the Civil War, but once the Union occupied the southern part of the state, it also fielded 23 Union regiments. Charles Felix Ory's father, Charles Sr., and uncle, Solomon Ory, both volunteered to serve for the Confederacy. Charles Sr. was a private in the Crescent Artillery, Company A, the company that manned the guns on Confederate ironclad Louisiana. Almost nothing is known of his service because the only record found for him with the unit is an undated muster roll. He was not with the company when they were all taken prisoner following the scuttling of their ship. We were able to determine his absence by comparing his service records to those of his fellow company members, confirming there are more muster rolls as well as POW records that do exist, but that Charles Sr.'s name is not included on them. Cross-referencing is key to determining where records are incomplete versus where a soldier was simply absent or no longer with the regiment when dealing with the Confederacy. Uncle Solomon Ory joined the 16th Mississippi Infantry at the beginning of the war. He was wounded at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse and died less than a month later from his wounds. Charles Felix, more commonly known as Felix, chose a different path than his family. A native of Mississippi, Felix was living in New Orleans with the family of Charles Sr.'s second wife, the Hernsheims, when he ran away from home at 14 to enlist as a bugler in the Union 1st Louisiana Cavalry. The 1st Louisiana Cavalry was organized in August 1862 in Union-occupied New Orleans, but Felix waited until November to enlist when the regiment was 60 miles away, in Thibodaux, Louisiana, joining far from adults who could stop him. He lied about his age, saying he was 16, still young enough, though, to require a guardian to sign for him. No enlistment contract is extant, however, so we do not know who stepped in to vouch for Felix. Over a year later, Charles Sr. wrote a letter to General Nathaniel P. Banks, pictured here at bottom right, asking for Felix to be discharged. The letter, shown here at left, reads, "I beg leave to inform you that my minor son, aged 15 years, left this city about 15 months ago and ran away from school. About 9 months ago, I discovered that he was in the service of the United States in the 1st Louisiana Cavalry and is at present in Napoleonville in this state and goes by the name of Little Charlie, his right name being Charles F. Ory. I do most respectfully request his immediate discharge from your excellency. He has written me several times requesting his discharge from the service. I am a loyal citizen and I am extremely desirous that he should finish his education before entering into the world. And I trust, considering his tender years, coupled with the services he has already rendered to his country, that you will grant him an immediate discharge and allow him to finish his education. It is a mystery where Charles Sr. thought Felix was for this first 6 months of his absence, and why Charles Sr. decided to write Banks when he did another 9 months later. Perhaps Felix's pleas to his father inspired Charles Sr. to finally pick up a pen. Whatever the inspiration, his request was not granted. Felix continued to serve until the end of October 1865, well past the end of the war. For the last summer of his service, Felix worked as an orderly to the officers of his regiment. The Ory family remains linked to the Hernsheims through more than just Charles Sr.'s marriage. After the war, Felix worked as an agent or traveling salesman, or the more fun job title from one newspaper ad, commercial tourist, for Hernsheim Brothers, a cigar and tobacco house in New Orleans. Through his roots for the Hernsheims, Felix became well known throughout Louisiana and East Texas. In 1874, Felix followed his father's lead and also joined the Hernsheim family by marriage, wedding Josephine Rice, the Hernsheim brothers' niece. The pair were married until Felix's death in 1891, when Felix was buried in the first of 3 Hebrew rest cemeteries established in New Orleans through Temple Sinai. We found this burial information through JewishGen's Worldwide Burial Registry, which is one of our favorite resources. The Jobar is especially helpful for large cemeteries where Jewish and non-Jewish non-Jewish and Jewish sections, when we are trying to confirm religion for a soldier. Josephine Ory lived another 44 years after Felix's death, which leads us to our last tip on researching a Civil War ancestor. Seen here at left are Felix's pension record index, downloaded from Fold 3, and his VA Master Index, found on Family Search. The majority of federal pensions for Union soldiers are held at the National Archives main facility in Washington, D.C. But a subset of the Civil War era pensions that remained active longer into the 20th century are actually housed at an archives facility in St. Louis. If you are looking at your ancestor's pension index and you see an additional number along the bottom with a C or an XC in front, as seen here on Felix's index, that means the file remained open long enough to be transferred from the Bureau of Pensions to the then newly formed Veterans Administration. There are 2 different Civil War pension indexes. One is available on Fold 3 and one is available on Ancestry. They contain slightly different information, and we recommend checking both. The index on Ancestry is more likely to include an XC number for what it's worth. Once you know you have a C or an XC number, you should then see if the soldier has a VA Master Index. The transcripts of these indexes can be looked up on Ancestry. The index cards themselves can be viewed on Family Search. If the soldier has a VA Master Index, their pension is most likely in St. Louis. If they do not have one, the pension is most likely held in Washington, D.C. The VA Master Indexes are also helpful genealogy tools, as they typically give birth and death information plus an address, which can prove instrumental in confirming who a soldier was outside their service. Because Josephine Ory lived until 1945, the VA held on to the pension file much longer than most, and it is now housed in St. Louis. We will obtain images of these pensions in the future, but for now remain grateful for how much information we were able to discover for Felix Ory without a pension. If you have an ancestor who served for the Union, you will be able to see in our database whether or not they received a pension, and if the pension is located in Washington, D.C., we will have reviewed it and you will have access to what we scanned. If their pension is located in St. Louis, we will have that noted in their record. If you have an ancestor who served for the Confederacy, the pension question is trickier. Every former Confederate state's pension rolls are organized differently and accessed through different repositories and websites. We do track when we have found a Confederate pension for a soldier and include citations as well as files where we can. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to all of that. We love hearing from you. Please let us know if we have your ancestor in the Shapell roster and you have questions, or if we don't have your ancestor so we can include them. Even if you're not sure whether the person you are researching did serve during the Civil War, we are happy to help you make that determination. The best way to reach out is to email us at roster@shapell.org. Visit us at www.shapell.org/roster to see what we have about your ancestor. Also, if you want to hear newly uncovered stories from the Shapell roster and find out when new states' records go online, we suggest you sign up for the Shapell Manuscript Foundation's newsletter for future announcements. Also, check us out on Facebook and Instagram for a pretty fun follow. We dropped a link in the chat at the beginning to a PDF you can download with this information, as well as links to the Shapell Manuscript Foundation's main page, the pages for the soldiers we have profiled today who are currently live on our site, and a number of other helpful links for conducting military and genealogical research for your Jewish ancestors, both from the Civil War and from other time periods. We hope you find this useful in your own research. Now let's see if you guys have some questions.
Well, thank you, Caitlin and Alexandra. Thank you so much for a really wonderful presentation. It's utterly fascinating. I'm blown away by hearing about these soldiers and their families, and then also, of course, the interconnections between the soldiers and the different people. I actually had a couple questions, and I hope that people are formulating questions. Well, one is a comment, and then the other is a question. So I'll just very quickly with the comment is that. I think you mentioned early in the presentation that one of the soldiers' descent came from Alsace. Um,
Yes.
so I was just saying that that's something that we could also help with in Jewish Gen in terms of finding, pushing that
Yes,
back, pushing the information back
absolutely.
further. So, but just it's a small question, but you mentioned Jacob Oreo de Castro, and I guess his brother-in-law was a de Sola. Is that the same family as the Sola Pool? Would you know
Is
offhand?
the Jasola pool in New Orleans?
I
No,
don't.
that's the Sheriff Israel family.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say I don't think so, but
Okay.
they do, you end up finding a lot of these guys are more connected than you thought. So there is definitely a possibility. I don't know that connection off the top of my head, however.
Right. No, of course. But I figured it was worth trotting out. Um, so I'm just looking and seeing if looks like people are still formulating questions.
There was one question earlier on.
Yes.
You might have answered it, but they were asking specifically about whether South Carolina records were on the Shapell roster. Someone had a
Yeah.
family named Iceman in the Darlington area in the 1840s.
Oh, great. South Carolina is a state that we have not yet well, we have dabbled in South Carolina, I will say that, but we have not by any means completed that state. It is currently on our to-do list and it is not currently published and live to the public. Please email us. I would love to talk to you. I
Yes.
have been doing some South Carolina work, and I would love to see if we have your ancestor. If we have anything already, I will definitely send you what we already have, and I would love to hear if you have information that we don't for sure. We love hearing from descendants, and you can really help us paint the full picture of someone's identity and their life. If you know anything at all, I'd love to talk to you.
Just a question you always get, but always worth saying it over again. How do you define Jewish for the Shapell roster?
So that is a challenging question. Different people have different definitions, but for our purposes, we choose to have a very broad definition. And so we do Jewish by genealogy. So we can trace their family. Mom and dad were Jewish, grandma was Jewish, somebody further back, not just by Jewish law. So it doesn't just have to be matrilineal, it can be patrilineal as well. We do Jewish by self-identification. So that would be if a soldier states somewhere. that he is Jewish, or he joins Jewish societies like B'nai B'rith, or he's a member of a synagogue, and then also choosing to be married in the Jewish faith or buried in the Jewish faith. So those vital events. And then we also have Jewish according to his peers. So if there are people from the time period who identified the soldier as Jewish, we will take that as well. Although we also do take anti Semitism into consideration. So if there's like nasty newspaper articles and there are slurs and it's not actually clear whether someone is trying to use that as an insult or if it's a fact, we definitely look hard at that before we would use something like that as evidence. But those are our
And I guess
main definitions.
the flip side would be, since when we look at Simon Wolf's list, and it's sort of been
Yes,
debunked in modern scholarship that he was profiling Jewish names, not
yes,
looking any farther than whether he thought a name was a Jewish name. How do you
correct.
determine who's not Jewish?
That is a great question. That is really, I would say, case by case basis, obviously. But we are trying to do as extensive research on every person on Simon Wolf's list that we can. And we really want to have some kind of definitive proof to say that we need to exclude someone on the list. And by exclude, the people that we prove are we think definitively not Jewish. They are still in our database. We
Yeah,
include
you
everyone
can
from
still
Simon
find
Wolf's
them.
book, but we will have information about why we think they're not Jewish.
Like if you find them on a baptism roster
It
or
doesn't
buried in,
always fill them out, but yeah, we try to get even more. There,
Yes.
surprisingly, there actually are some baptismal records specifically from Europe that have a lot of Jewish people on them, just because they were just registering births, and so it will look like a
Right.
register
In the
from a
local
church.
community.
And if there wasn't a synagogue or that's where that municipality registered births, they may still appear on it. So in that case, we even try, if we can, to go back even further. A lot of times, if we see that a soldier's parents, maybe a soldier's parents were baptized, they were married by a Catholic priest, they
Right.
were part of Catholic organizations. The soldier is also identified as Catholic. He's buried in a Catholic
Right.
cemetery. Like we try to take it as far as we can, and we will give that kind of proof of evidence that we have found. We will say we believe this
Yeah.
person is not Jewish, and here's why. Here is this material that you can look at to kind of also see. I would love, my like dream is to have this information about someone and have a descendant contact me and be like, let me tell you why you're wrong about this
Yeah.
person, and I know why. I know that they actually were Jewish, and let me tell you why, or vice
Absolutely.
versa. So
And that's why we keep them in the database. People have
yeah.
asked us, like, well, why do you have these people who aren't Jewish in the database? And it's so, number one, people can see our work as they're looking at Simon Wolf and they want to know, well, why don't you have include this person? And then it's again exactly what Alex said. If someone comes along and is like, actually, you got it wrong, here's my evidence. We also have a middle road designation that we call Jewish according to Wolf, which is what I would think the majority of the names in Simon Wolf's book actually fall under, where we're not definitively saying they're not Jewish, but we are not definitively saying they're Jewish either, because there's just not enough information in the historical record right now that we can find to say one way or another. The good news is, as we mentioned in our presentation, new records come online every day, and all these different resources can come together and really help us drill down and figure out who these people were outside of their service. That's the biggest problem with Simon Wolf. He would pick a name and he would be like, okay, so anyone named Moses Abraham was Jewish. Well, a lot of Baptists liked old uh Old Testament names and they're using them and they're naming their kids them. And so he grabbed everyone named Moses Abraham. And when you're talking about some of these enlistment centers like Philadelphia or New York City, and you have 50 Moses Abrahams in the city, it becomes very challenging to figure out who that soldier was of the 50 Moses Abrahams living in New York City at that time. And so that's our ongoing mission is to figure all of that out. And then the flip side of name profiling is one of the heads of the Hebrew Union Veterans Association's name was Adam Brown. It just doesn't necessarily work. So,
And going off of that as well, like we have found, for this very reason and others, but we have found many, many soldiers that Simon Wolf missed. So he has this very extensive roster, but we have found a number of soldiers, especially now working with the Confederacy, that were Jewish, were, openly living a Jewish life, had, openly talking about their military service or not, and Simon Wolf didn't include them in his roster.
I had a question. I was just looking at the chat, and one of the questions that was raised in the chat, which I guess Adrian had answered, was the number of records. I think she wrote there were 3,293 records, and 1,760 are of Union service, and 1,527 have Confederate service. And as I think you mentioned earlier, 8 have service on both sides, which is very
Mhm.
intriguing, actually. Um, I guess 2 questions. So one is, um, it would seem to me that there should be a lot more Union soldiers than Confederate soldiers, but these numbers are pretty close.
They
Um,
are.
Yeah,
yeah.
they
So
are.
is there significance to that, or is it have to do with what records are available, or in fact that Jews in the Confederacy were as motivated, if not more motivated, than Jews in the North?
I think that is like the big ongoing question that we're
Mystery we're trying to solve.
dealing with. I would say I want to stress greatly that our numbers, I'm pretty sure that our numbers are actually different than this because they change literally every day. Um, we're always adding new people. Sometimes we're actually finding out that Simon Wolf listed 2 different men who are actually the same person. So we're combining records sometimes. But we're not sure. I think that when we were doing the union, we focused a lot on Wolf's roster, and we looked a little left and we looked a little right to see if we could find anyone new. But then going into the Confederacy, we're seeing a lot of big families, communities where there was less anonymity. You knew everyone who was enlisting in your community, so it's just kind of a different animal, the Confederacy, than the Union. Um, I know that's like a long-winded way to say we don't know
No,
yet.
no, that's good.
But
It's good
Well,
though.
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, and
it's going
the
to be an
union,
interesting story.
Yeah.
yeah, the unions, like service in the union versus service in the Confederacy as a whole is very different. And I think that kind of gets lost in the consideration. It's a lot harder to avoid service in the South. They had a much more intensive draft. So we have a lot of people enlisting in, more favorable regiments to avoid being drafted beyond the people who volunteer right at the beginning. And there was a lot more judgment from the community if you didn't join the military. We have records of Confederate soldiers who get captured to the Union side, and they're like, look, they were going to close my business down if I didn't join a regiment. People were going to stop shopping at my store if I didn't join. So I joined. Whereas in the Union, there wasn't that same societal pressure. Like people weren't mad at you if you weren't joining the army. And what we found so far, and I think it'll be, again, like Alex said, our numbers are always changing. So we can't make any hard conclusions yet at all. But what we found so far is typically Jews served actually in very proportionate numbers to, society as a whole where they were from. So if 25% of the city was enlisting in New York City, around 25% was enlisting, and I'm making that number up. That is not, do not take that as an exact number, but it was very proportionate. I mean, and that is one of the things that we find the most notable about Jewish service is it was a thing that a long time ago people didn't even believe it existed, and then we're finding they serve the same as everyone else. Like the numbers are very similar to society as a whole. So
Yeah, also kind of going off of that, I just wanted to mention that one of the things that I kind of love the most about the roster as a whole is that I feel on a daily basis that we are like furthering Simon Wolf's mission. And I feel like his mission was to prove to people that Jews were patriotic and they were serving for their country, and they were enlisting at the same numbers as everyone else. And while like nuances and differences are really interesting to us, I do think that this kind of thing, what Caitlin is talking about, is that we're just proving that Wolf was right. and that we're proving that, like, yes, Jews were very patriotic. They were enlisting at the same in the same numbers as everyone else. So I love that about the roster.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, it's incredible that you were able to like detail these people's lives and also understand a little bit about the country. Like I thought it was really interesting how, the North was more organized. There was like central sources of information where the South was
Yes.
state by state, which I thought was also fascinating. I was wondering if you could say something about the eight or some of the eight who had service on both sides. That's really intriguing. And I did not expect to hear that.
Most of them are Confederate to Union, although I think we have like two or three that are Union to Confederate. Usually what it is, not up for everyone, but the majority of the time, it's that you're captured by the one side and you agree to service with the other side to get out of prison camp. And so they had a term for it. Confederates who became Union soldiers were called galvanized Yankees, and they had specific regiments for them that they would send them to, predominantly out west, dealing with American Indian tribes, not actually fighting in the Civil War itself, just kind of serving. They're like, well, we're having problems over here that we sort of want to deal with, but we need everybody we can get down south. So we're going to send you out here where there's no conflict of interest.
Fascinating.
But,
So
mhm.
interesting.
There was
So
one question about whether most people who took part on both sides in the Civil War were more from Western Europe than Eastern Europe.
I would say most of the soldiers we have from Europe in general are from Western Europe. Eastern Europe migration is somewhat limited. Uh, by the time the Civil War, like around the period the Civil War happens, and then greatly increases in the decades afterwards. We do have a couple of Russian soldiers. We do have a couple of soldiers from that general region, but it's all mostly Western. And I would say the galvanized Yankee thing, there isn't really a pattern that I can think of off the top of my head for who it necessarily was. Like I said, it was a very common practice. And if you had been sitting in a POW camp, you're like, if this is a way I get to leave, sounds good to
Yeah.
me.
And I mean, a lot of those camps, stating sort of the obvious, is that
Yeah.
they were riddled with diseases. And so
Oh,
you could die of illness rotting away in a POW camp. So, given
yes.
the choice to live, you'd switch
Yes.
sides.
Yes.
Yes, and actually,
Also,
another plug, but we are going to be doing a presentation about Jews who were POWs at Andersonville Prison, which is one of the most notoriously, probably the most notoriously bad prison during the Civil War, next month. So we're excited to further explore that and what we find there.
That would be a great topic. Somebody in the chat earlier had mentioned POW camp in Elmira, New York. So it's Western New York
yes.
State,
Mhm.
and that there
Mhm.
were Jewish POWs who had been buried in a nearby
Yes.
cemetery. I'm from New York State. I
Yes.
never heard that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's the Elmira National Cemetery, right?
So there is a national cemetery, and then there are several Jews, I believe, from that camp that got taken to Jewish cemeteries. We also have that in Chicago. We have a couple of Confederate POWs that were buried in Jewish Graceland Cemetery, I think. I think that's the correct Jewish cemetery in Chicago. But basically, what would happen is that the local people helping to run these POW camps would, sometimes they would be Jewish. And if they found someone who was a co-religionist who was a prisoner, they would try and tend to them or check on them and make sure, their needs were being met as best they could. And then if they passed, like that is a sign that one of these citizens who was nearby or someone who was a Union soldier who was also Jewish went out of their way to make sure that that person received a Jewish burial.
Fascinating.
thank you so much. Unless there are other questions, I want to take this opportunity to thank Caitlin and Alexandra and also Ellen. And also special thanks to Karen Franklin, who was involved in organizing this, and Alexia, who played a big role in making sure everything
You're
went
my
smoothly.
hero, Alexia. Thank you.
So, but this was really a fantastic presentation. So interesting. I learned so much. And so I want to thank everybody, all of you for participating, especially, like I say, Caitlin and Alexandra and Ellen.
If you have any information at all, you want assistance, anything, just please reach out. We love talking to everybody. And thank you so much for this opportunity. Ellen, Karen, Alexia, Paul, you guys have been amazing.
Our pleasure. Thank you.